3 horror stories. Navajo Reservation. Based on real stories. Not all terror comes from fiction. Story 1. The thing that wore my voice. The desert at night holds secrets that even the bravest souls dare not uncover. The vastness of the starlit sky above the Navajo Reservation conceals entities that move between our world and realms we can barely comprehend. This is my story, a warning to those who think some doors are meant to be opened. My name is Sarah, and 2 years ago, my husband Mike and I moved into a small trailer on the outskirts of the Navajo Nation in northern Arizona. The landscape there is breathtaking. Red rock formations stretching toward an endless blue sky by day, and by night, more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. Mike had been offered a position working with the tribal council on water infrastructure projects. The pay was good and we were young, adventurous. We thought it would be an exciting chapter in our lives. Our trailer sat about half a mile from our nearest neighbor, isolated, but that's what we wanted. Peace, quiet, a chance to connect with nature and disconnect from the chaos of city life. What we didn't understand was that in some places, isolation isn't just about distance from other people. It's about being vulnerable to things that prefer the edges, the boundaries where civilization fades and older, wilder territories begin. The Navajo elders speak of creatures that walk in the shadows, beings that were once human but chose a darker path, gaining supernatural abilities at the cost of their humanity. Most outsiders dismiss these as campfire stories designed to scare children into behaving. We should have listened. It began on our 3rd week at the trailer, a simple sound that would forever change our lives, knocking on our door shortly after midnight. Knock, knock, knock. 3 distinct taps, evenly spaced. Not frantic or urgent, but deliberate, purposeful. Who could that be at this hour? Mike whispered, reaching for the baseball bat we kept near the bed. I followed him to the door, my heart pounding. We lived too far from neighbors for casual visits, especially at midnight. Mike looked through the peephole, then cautiously opened the door. Nothing. Just the empty desert night, silent and still. We dismissed it as perhaps an animal, or the desert wind playing tricks with the loose panels of our trailer. But the next night, at almost the exact same time, the knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. Again, nothing when we answered. By the 5th night, the pattern was established. Always 3 knocks, always around midnight. Never anyone there when we checked. I'm going to set up my phone to record the porch, Mike said on the 6th night. Let's see what's playing games with us. The footage showed nothing. No person, no animal, just our empty porch, and at exactly 12:17 a.m. the distinctive sound of knocking, but nothing visible causing it. Maybe it's time we speak with someone from the reservation, I suggested. They might know about local phenomena. Mike agreed, though I could tell he was trying to maintain skepticism. He'd always been the rational one, seeking logical explanations for everything. The following day, he mentioned the knocking to one of his Navajo colleagues. The man's reaction was immediate. His friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a solemn intensity. How long has this been happening? He asked. About a week now, Mike replied. Has anything unusual happened since? Have you seen anything out of place? Mike shook his head. Just the knocking. No one's ever there. The man nodded slowly. Keep it that way. Don't invite it in. Don't acknowledge it. And whatever you do, don't look for it. Of course, being told not to look for something almost guarantees that you will. Human curiosity is a powerful force, often more powerful than caution. That night, Mike decided to wait by the window instead of answering the door. I'm going to catch whatever it is in the act, he said, positioning himself where he could see the porch while remaining hidden behind the curtain. I sat on the couch, pretending to read while anxiety knotted my stomach. The digital clock on our microwave ticked over to midnight and we waited. 12:17 a.m. came and went. Nothing. Maybe it knows we're watching, I whispered, almost disappointed. Just as Mike was about to give up, I noticed his body stiffen. His hand, which had been resting on the windowsill, suddenly gripped the edge so tightly his knuckles turned white. Mike, I whispered. What is it? He didn't respond, didn't move, just stared out into the darkness, his face gradually draining of color. I moved toward him slowly. "What do you see?" He raised his hand slightly, signaling me to be quiet, then beckoned me to join him at the window. That's when I saw it. About 20 yards from our trailer, just at the periphery of our porch light's reach, was something that defied explanation. It was crouched on all fours like an animal, but all wrong. Its limbs were too long, too thin, the joints bending at unnatural angles. The proportions were a mockery of anything found in nature. Its skin, if you could call it that, had a grayish cast that seemed to absorb the scant light rather than reflect it. But it was the face that sent ice through my veins. It wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite human. Rather, it seemed like a patchwork, features from different creatures stitched together in a nightmarish collage. Eyes that reflected light like a predator's. A mouth with too many teeth, arranged in a grotesque approximation of a smile. And it was watching us. Not moving, not approaching, just observing. "What is that thing?" I breathed, barely making a sound. Mike shook his head slightly, unwilling to take his eyes off the creature. "I don't know, but I think it's what's been knocking." "But why would it knock and then hide?" I asked. "Testing," Mike whispered. "I think it's testing us." We stood frozen at the window for what seemed like hours, neither of us willing to move, to break the strange standoff. The creature remained motionless as well, its reflective eyes fixed on our trailer. Eventually, the tension became unbearable. My legs ached from standing so still for so long. "I'm going back to bed," I whispered to Mike. "It doesn't seem to be doing anything." He nodded but remained at his post. "I'll keep watch a while longer." I retreated to our bedroom, though I was certain sleep would be impossible with that thing outside. To my surprise, exhaustion overcame my fear, and I drifted off almost immediately. The next thing I knew, I was jarred awake by a sound. A voice. My voice. "Mike, it's me. Please let me in." But I wasn't speaking. My mouth wasn't moving. I was still in bed, paralyzed with a new kind of terror. "Mike, I'm cold out here. Please open the door." My exact intonation, my exact cadence, but coming from outside our trailer. I threw off the covers and ran to the living room, terrified of what I might find. Had Mike opened the door? Had he thought it was me outside? I found him still at the window, but now he was pressed against the wall beside it, as if trying to disappear into the shadows. His face was ashen. "It's closer," he whispered when he saw me. "And Sarah, it's using your voice." I crept to the window and peeked out. The creature had moved. It was now at the edge of our porch, still on all fours but raised up slightly, its head cocked to one side as if listening. Its mouth, that awful approximation of a mouth, was moving and my voice was coming out of it. "Mike, don't you recognize me? It's Sarah. Open the door." A wave of revulsion washed over me. It wasn't just using my voice, it was using my identity, my connection to my husband as a weapon. "What does it want?" I asked, pulling away from the window. "To be invited in," Mike said grimly. "The Navajo believe some entities can't enter a home unless they're invited. That's why it's been knocking, why it's mimicking you now. It's trying to trick me into opening the door." The realization of how close we might have come to opening that door on previous nights made my blood run cold. What would have happened if we'd been just a little quicker to answer? If we'd opened the door before whoever, whatever was knocking had retreated? "We need to call someone," I said, reaching for my phone. "No service, remember?" Mike replied. "That's why we got the satellite internet." Our internet connection, however, had mysteriously gone down earlier that evening. We were completely cut off. Throughout the night, the creature continued its charade, its mimicry becoming more sophisticated, more convincing. It cycled through different approaches, my voice pleading, then angry, then crying. It recounted private details of our life together, things no stranger could know. "Remember our first date at Rivera's, Mike? You spilled wine on my white dress and I pretended not to mind. Let me in, love. I'm frightened out here." The intimacy of these details struck a new kind of horror in me. How could it know these things? Had it been watching us for longer than we realized? Reading our minds somehow? Mike and I huddled together on the couch, as far from the windows and doors as possible, listening to this thing wear my voice like a stolen garment. Dawn came eventually, though it felt like the longest night of our lives. As the first rays of sunlight crested the distant mesas, the creature and its awful mimicry ceased. When we finally dared to look outside, there was nothing there. No footprints, no evidence of the nightmare we'd endured. Without discussing it, we both began packing. Neither of us spoke about what had happened, as if giving voice to it might somehow summon it back. We threw essential belongings into our car and drove straight to the Navajo community where Mike worked. Mike's colleague, the one who had warned him, seemed unsurprised to see us. His eyes took in our disheveled appearance, the fear still etched on our faces. "You saw it," he said simply. We nodded. "What was it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We call them skinwalkers," he replied. They were once human, medicine people who chose to use their knowledge for harm instead of healing. They gained power but lost their humanity in the process. "It knew things," I said, "personal things about us, and it used my voice." The man nodded grimly. "They are shapeshifters, mimics. They observe their prey, learn their habits, their relationships. Once they've chosen a target, they're patient and persistent." "What does it want?" Mike asked. "To feed," came the reply. "Not just on flesh, but on fear, on pain, on the corruption of everything good and pure. They hunger for it." He advised us to leave the area immediately and not return to the trailer. "The things you own can be replaced," he said. "Your lives cannot." We drove straight to Flagstaff that day and checked into a motel. The following week, Mike requested a transfer to another project away from the reservation. All our possessions at the trailer, furniture, clothes, mementos, we left behind. Some things aren't worth the risk of retrieving. It's been 2 years now. We've moved twice since then, currently living in a busy suburb of Phoenix. We tell ourselves that we're safe now, surrounded by neighbors, streetlights, the constant hum of civilization. But sometimes in the deepest part of night, I wake to the sound of 3 distinct knocks on our door. Mike says he doesn't hear them, that it's just the memory of trauma playing tricks on my mind. Perhaps he's right, or perhaps it found us again. The Navajo believe that speaking of skinwalkers gives them power, attracts their attention. I've broken that taboo by sharing this story, but you deserve to be warned. If you find yourself in the desert at night and hear a familiar voice calling your name from the darkness, don't answer, don't look, and whatever you do, don't open the door. Because some things wear familiar faces to hide intentions that are anything but familiar. What unexplained phenomena have you encountered in isolated places? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this true account kept you looking over your shoulder, make sure to subscribe for more documented encounters with the unexplained. Remember to turn on notifications so you never miss a new video that might just save your life one day. Story 2. The voice that knew my name. Have you ever felt that primal instinct in the wilderness? That inexplicable knowledge that something is watching you from the shadows? Our ancestors called it the third eye, that sense that kept them alive when predators lurked nearby. What I'm about to share with you might sound impossible, but I assure you every word is true. And it might just save your life one day if you find yourself alone in the wrong part of the forest. My name is Jason Reynolds. 2 summers ago, my friend Chris Matthews and I decided to go camping in the eastern Utah wilderness, in a remote area that borders Ute tribal lands. We were both experienced outdoorsmen in our early 30s who'd spent countless weekends exploring the Southwest. Between us, we'd hiked most of the notable trails in Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. This particular location wasn't marked on tourist maps or guidebooks. Chris had heard about it from a coworker who claimed the fishing was extraordinary, and the isolation meant we'd have the entire place to ourselves. No crowds, no noise pollution, just pristine wilderness. What we didn't realize was that locals intentionally avoided this region, especially after sundown. The Ute people have ancient stories about entities that exist in the in-between spaces of our world. Beings that aren't quite human, aren't quite animal, but something altogether more disturbing. These stories stretch back centuries, passed down through generations of indigenous communities. The elders speak of creatures that can mimic human voices to lure unwary travelers away from safety. They're described as having unnaturally elongated limbs, eyes that reflect light like animals, and an insatiable hunger for human suffering. Most tourists dismiss these as folk tales meant to keep children close to home or to give cultural identity to the tribe. We were no different. 2 modern men who respected indigenous culture but didn't truly believe in supernatural beings lurking in the forests. We arrived at the trailhead on a Friday afternoon in late June. The weather was perfect. Clear blue skies with a light breeze that kept the temperature comfortable. The 5-mile hike to our chosen campsite took us through some of the most beautiful scenery I've ever encountered. Crystal clear streams cutting through emerald meadows, ancient pine forests with trees wider than both of us could reach around, wildlife that seemed almost unafraid of human presence. "This place feels untouched," Chris remarked as we set up our tent in a small clearing near a bubbling stream. "Like we're the first people to ever come here. How I wish now that we had been the last." The first day passed uneventfully. We fished in the stream, caught enough trout for dinner, and spent the evening around the campfire swapping stories and enjoying the stars that emerged in breathtaking clarity once darkness fell. It was around midnight when things began to feel wrong. I was nearly asleep in our tent when I noticed the forest had gone completely silent. The constant symphony of insects, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustling of nocturnal creatures, all had ceased. The silence was absolute, pressing against my ears like a physical presence. "Chris," I whispered, nudging my friend. "Do you hear that?" He stirred, blinking in confusion. "Hear what?" "Exactly. Nothing. The forest is completely silent." Chris sat up, suddenly alert. We both strained our ears, listening to the void where natural sounds should have been. That's when we heard it, my name spoken so softly it could have been the wind rustling through leaves. "Jason." There was no wind that night. I froze, looking at Chris. "Did you hear that?" He nodded slowly, his face pale in the beam of our small lantern. Then his name followed. "Chris." It sounded almost like my mother's voice, but wrong. The inflection was off, the timing unnatural, as if someone had heard her speak but was trying to replicate the sound without understanding how human speech actually works. "Probably some hikers messing with us," Chris suggested, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. The voice came again, closer this time. "Jason, help me. Jason." It was definitely mimicking my mother now, but the voice kept slipping, like a radio station not quite tuned correctly. Something about it sent ice down my spine, a primal warning that whatever was speaking wasn't human. "I'm going to check it out," I said, reaching for my flashlight. Chris grabbed my arm with surprising force. "Are you out of your mind?" "That's exactly what it wants." The urgency in his voice gave me pause. "What do you mean, it?" Chris hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "When I was a kid, my grandmother, she was half Ute, used to tell stories about creatures in these forests. Things that could sound like people you know to lure you away from safety. You can't seriously believe—" "Jason, I need you. Please help me." The voice interrupted, now sounding like a perfect imitation of my mother in distress. Something inside me, some deeply buried instinct, screamed danger. But another part, the rational modern man, thought, what if someone was actually hurt out there? What if by some impossible coincidence my mother had somehow gotten lost in these woods? "I'll just take a quick look," I said, unzipping the tent. "Stay here." The night air was unnaturally cold as I stepped outside. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating trees that suddenly seemed grotesque, their branches reaching like gnarled fingers toward the starlit sky. I swept the light in a slow arc, calling out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No response, just the unnatural silence. Then I caught a glimpse of movement between the trees about 30 yards away. My flashlight beam found a shape, tall and thin, standing upright but with proportions that were jarringly wrong. Its limbs were too long, too slender. The head seemed oversized, perched atop a neck that bent at an impossible angle. For one terrible moment, my light caught its eyes, reflecting back with an animal's eyeshine, but from a face that was a twisted parody of human features. The skin was pulled tight over protruding bones, patched with what looked like coarse, matted fur. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. As the beam wavered, the figure seemed to shift, dropping to all fours in a fluid movement no human could replicate. "Chris," I yelled, running back to our tent. "We need to get inside, now!" We dove into the tent, zipping it shut as if that thin layer of nylon could protect us from whatever lurked in the forest. Outside, something began circling our campsite. The footsteps were bizarre, sometimes sounding like an animal on 4 legs, sometimes like a person walking upright but with an uneven, staggering gait. "What is that thing?" I whispered, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "My grandmother called them skin changers," Chris replied, his voice barely audible. Beings that can take different forms, mimic different voices. They use what you love against you. Throughout that endless night, the creature kept calling to us, cycling through different voices. My mother, Chris's girlfriend, even my little brother who lived 2,000 miles away in Boston. Each time, the imitation got a little better, a little more convincing. "Jason, please help me. I'm hurt out here. Don't you recognize your mother's voice? Chris, baby, let me in. It's freezing out here. Why are you hiding from me?" The worst part was when it pressed against the tent, its silhouette visible through the fabric. Long fingers, too many fingers, traced the outline of our shelter. We could hear it breathing, smell an odor like wet fur and something rotting. "If we make it to sunrise, it'll go away," Chris said, though I don't know how he knew that. The entity became more aggressive as the night wore on. It began to shake the tent, pulling at the fabric, testing the zippers. We used our bodies to hold the entrance closed, certain that if it got inside, we wouldn't survive until morning. "Let me in!" It howled in a voice that was no longer trying to sound human. The sound was like multiple voices layered atop each other. A child's laughter underneath an old man's rasp underneath something utterly inhuman. Just when we thought the tent would tear apart, the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky. As if responding to an invisible boundary, the creature let out a sound. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream, and the pressure against our tent vanished. We waited, trembling, as sunlight gradually filtered through the trees. An hour after sunrise, we finally dared to unzip the tent. The campsite looked like a whirlwind had hit it. Our supplies were scattered everywhere, some torn to shreds. Our backpacks had been emptied, contents strewn across the clearing, as if something had been searching for something specific. And circling our tent were footprints, some looking like a large canine, others clearly human, and some a disturbing hybrid of both, with elongated toes ending in what appeared to be claw marks in the soft earth. We packed what remained of our gear in record time and hiked out, not stopping once until we reached the car. Neither of us spoke about what had happened. There seemed to be an unspoken agreement that putting the experience into words might somehow make it more real, more permanent. On the drive back to civilization, we stopped at a gas station near the Ute Reservation. While filling up, I noticed an elderly native man watching us with an odd expression. Something compelled me to approach him, showing him the photos I'd taken of the footprints on my phone. He took one look and his weathered face drained of color. "Where did you see these?" he asked quietly. I told him the location. He nodded grimly. "That valley has been forbidden to our people for generations," he said. "The beings that dwell there, they wear the voices of those you love like we wear clothes. They use your connections, your memories to lure you away from companions." "What are they?" I asked. "They were human once," he replied. "Medicine people who turned to dark practices, gaining power by shedding their humanity. Now they exist between worlds, neither fully here nor fully elsewhere." He told us these entities feed not just on flesh, but on fear and suffering. The terror they create is as nourishing to them as food is to us. "You are fortunate," he said. "They rarely let potential prey escape." I haven't been camping since that trip. Chris moved to Chicago 6 months later, and we rarely speak anymore. Some experiences create a bond, but others drive people apart, especially when acknowledging them means confronting something your mind simply cannot accept. Sometimes at night, I still jolt awake thinking I hear my mother's voice calling from outside my apartment. In those moments between sleeping and waking, I lie perfectly still, listening intently for any sound that might indicate something found its way back from those remote woods. The rational part of my mind says it was just an animal, perhaps a mountain lion or wolf displaying unusual behavior. After all, the human mind is programmed to find patterns, to create explanations for the unexplainable. But another part of me knows better, because sometimes when my phone rings and I hear my mother's voice, there's that split second of terror, wondering if it's really her, or if something else has finally tracked me down. What I can tell you with certainty is this: if you're ever in the wilderness at night and hear a familiar voice calling your name from the darkness, do not answer. Do not investigate. And whatever you do, do not go alone. Because some things in this world wear familiar sounds to disguise intentions that are anything but familiar. Have you ever experienced something unexplainable in the wilderness? Something that made you question what you thought you knew about reality? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this documented account made you reconsider your next camping trip, subscribe for more true encounters with the unexplained. Turn on notifications so you never miss another warning that could one day save your life.
Story 3.
The Predator on the Midnight Road. They say the desert holds ancient secrets in its red dust and endless skies. But the most dangerous secret isn't what lies beneath the sand. It's what waits for you on those lonely stretches of highway when the moon hangs high and your headlights cut through darkness like twin blades. There's a reason the elders warn against traveling those roads after sundown, a reason written in the disappearances of those who didn't heed their warnings. My name is Daniel Sosi. I was born and raised on the Navajo Nation in northern Arizona. What I'm about to share happened in 1997. But the memory remains as vivid as yesterday, a wound that time has failed to heal. Back then, I was 32, working construction in Flagstaff but living on the reservation. The commute was long, but worth it. My wife and our 2 young children were surrounded by family, by tradition, by the culture I wanted them to inherit. Our people have lived on this land for countless generations, developing a deep understanding of its rhythms and mysteries. My grandfather was a respected elder in our community. From childhood, he would tell me stories, not just to entertain, but to protect. The land speaks to those who listen, he would say, his weathered face serious in the firelight. It warns of dangers, it reveals truths, but some truths are better left undisturbed. One warning he repeated often: if you see something on the road that doesn't look right, don't look at it again. They hate to be seen. As a child, these words frightened me. As an adult, I dismissed them as superstition, the kind of cautionary tales all cultures develop to keep their children safe. I respected our traditions, but I lived in the modern world, where monsters existed only in imagination. I was wrong. Every Navajo child grows up hearing stories about skinwalkers. In our language, we call them Yi-nal-dlushi. With it, one goes on all fours. They were once human, medicine people who chose to use their knowledge for personal gain rather than healing. By performing forbidden rituals, they gain supernatural abilities, but at the cost of their humanity. They can transform themselves into animals. They can run faster than any natural creature. They can mimic the voices of your loved ones to lure you into danger. And they feed not just on flesh, but on fear, on the terror they inspire in their victims. Most non-natives treat these stories as folklore or myth. Even some of our own people, especially younger generations, regard them with skepticism. After all, in a world of smartphones and satellite TV, how could such entities exist undocumented? But those who've lived on the reservation long enough know better. They've heard too many accounts from reliable sources. They've experienced too many unexplained phenomena. They know certain areas are avoided for reasons beyond logical explanation. Places where the boundary between worlds grows thin. The road between Flagstaff and the western edge of the reservation is one such place. A 70-mile stretch of asphalt cutting through some of the most isolated terrain in America. By day, it's breathtaking. Red rock formations, ancient mesas, vast skies. By night, it transforms into something else entirely. That night in late October, I was returning home later than usual. A problem at the construction site had kept me until almost midnight. I'd called my wife on the landline at the foreman's office, telling her not to wait up. The drive back to the reservation is lonely in daylight. At night, it's like traveling through a void. Miles of empty desert with no houses, no streetlights, no cell service. Just you and whatever else moves in the darkness. I remember the temperature dropping quickly that night. Unusual even for October. My old pickup's heater struggled against the cold. The radio faded in and out, eventually giving way to static that scratched at my nerves. I turned it off, preferring silence to that persistent hiss. About halfway home, I noticed something strange. The air inside the truck began to feel heavy, oppressive, as if the atmospheric pressure had suddenly changed. My ears popped. The headlights seemed to dim slightly, though the dashboard indicators showed nothing wrong with the electrical system. And then I saw it. What I initially thought was a large dog standing in the middle of the road about 100 yards ahead. My first reaction was concern rather than fear. Hitting an animal at highway speed would be dangerous for both of us. I tapped my brakes, slowing from 70 to about 45 as I approached. As my headlights more fully illuminated it, something felt wrong. The proportions weren't right. Its legs seemed too long, its body too thin, and it was just standing there. No startled freezing like deer caught in headlights, no attempt to flee. It was positioned directly in the center of my lane, as if deliberately blocking my path. I tapped my brakes again, slowing to around 30 miles per hour. Close enough now to make out more details, I realized with growing unease that this was no ordinary animal. Its coat wasn't fur, but something else. A grayish, almost scaly texture that absorbed rather than reflected my headlights. Then it did something no dog should be able to do. It stood up on its hind legs. In that moment, all the stories my grandfather had told me, stories I'd dismissed as superstition, came flooding back. My hands tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The creature now stood like a man, but with the head of a canine. Not quite coyote, not quite wolf. Its face seemed stretched, distorted, like a mask made of actual flesh. And its eyes reflected my headlights with an unnatural reddish glow. For one terrible moment, our gazes locked. Those eyes held intelligence. Cold, calculating, ancient. This wasn't an animal. It was something using an animal's form. Something that knew exactly what it was doing. My grandfather's warning echoed in my mind. If you see something that doesn't look right, don't look at it again. They hate to be seen. But it was too late. I had seen it and it had seen me. Every instinct told me to floor the accelerator to drive straight through the thing if necessary. But as I pressed the gas pedal, my engine sputtered and died. The dashboard lights flickered and went out. Even my headlights dimmed to nothing, leaving me in complete darkness with that entity, just yards away. I tried the ignition again and again, but the truck was dead. In the silence, I could hear my own panicked breathing and, faintly, the sound of claws on asphalt. Slow, methodical steps approaching my vehicle. I remembered stories of skinwalkers disabling cars, of their ability to interfere with technology. Some elders claimed they could even project fear as a weapon, paralyzing their victims with supernatural terror. If that was true, their power was working. I found myself unable to move, frozen in my seat as cold sweat trickled down my spine. The logical part of my mind searched desperately for rational explanations. A coyote with rabies, perhaps, or some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But deep down, I knew. Then came the waiting. For what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, nothing happened. The creature had stopped approaching. I couldn't see it anymore without the headlights, but I could feel its presence. A malevolent weight pressing against my consciousness. A childhood memory surfaced. My grandmother placing cedar bundles in the corners of our home, explaining that certain herbs and prayers created boundaries that evil couldn't cross. I had nothing sacred with me, nothing to create that boundary, just the thin metal shell of my truck between me and whatever waited in the darkness. Suddenly, my truck's electrical system came back to life on its own. The dashboard lit up. The engine turned over without me touching the key. The headlights blazed back on. The road ahead was empty. Relief washed over me. So intense I felt lightheaded. Whatever had happened, whatever I'd seen, it was gone now. I accelerated, eager to put as much distance as possible between myself and that spot on the highway. I'd driven perhaps half a mile when I glanced in my rearview mirror. A reflexive action, the kind of check any driver makes regularly. What I saw turned my blood to ice. The creature was behind my truck, running on all fours, moving with impossible speed. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, like stop-motion animation come to life. Within seconds, it was right behind me, close enough that I could no longer see it in my mirrors. It had entered the blind spot directly behind my vehicle. I floored the accelerator, pushing my old truck beyond any speed I'd ever attempted on this dangerous road. The engine screamed in protest as the needle pushed past 80, 90 miles per hour. Under normal circumstances, this reckless speed on a dark desert road would be a death wish. But these weren't normal circumstances. The road ahead twisted and turned through the desert landscape. Taking curves at this speed was suicidal, but slowing down seemed more dangerous still. Each time I dared to check my side mirrors, I caught glimpses of the creature keeping pace with my vehicle, sometimes on the right, sometimes on the left, as if it were toying with me. At one point, it moved alongside my truck, close enough that I could see its face in my peripheral vision. Though I fought against the urge to look directly at it, I couldn't help but notice that its mouth was open in what appeared to be a grin, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. It was enjoying this, enjoying my fear, my desperate flight. Traditional Navajo teachings say that skinwalkers gain power from human terror, that they harvest it like a crop, cultivating and collecting it to fuel their unnatural abilities. If that was true, I was providing a feast. I drove like that for almost 20 minutes, terror keeping me alert despite the dangerous speed and winding road. Finally, I saw the lights of the reservation community in the distance, clusters of yellow windows breaking the perfect darkness, evidence of civilization and safety. According to our teachings, skinwalkers avoid populated areas. The combined spiritual strength of a community creates a boundary they cannot easily cross. As I approached the first homes, I checked my mirror once more. The road behind me was empty. I didn't slow down until I reached our house, pulling into the driveway with tires screeching. The porch light was on. My wife always left it burning when I worked late. That simple square of warm light seemed like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I sat in the truck for several minutes, engine idling, trying to collect myself. My hands shook uncontrollably. My shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cold night. My heart hammered against my ribs as if trying to escape. What had I just experienced? Was it real? Or had exhaustion played tricks on my mind? I didn't tell anyone what happened that night. Not my wife, not my colleagues, not my friends. How could I explain what I'd seen without sounding like I'd lost my mind? Instead, I carried the experience like a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. The following day, after a sleepless night, I visited my grandfather. I didn't need to say anything. He took one look at my face and knew. "You saw one," he said simply. It wasn't a question. I nodded, finally telling someone what I'd experienced. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, staring into the middle distance as if seeing things invisible to my eyes. Finally, he spoke. "You're fortunate to be alive, grandson. The Yinald Lushi, they don't usually let people go once they've marked them." "Why did it stop following me?" I asked. "Our people have lived on this land for thousands of years," he replied. "The evil ones cannot easily enter places where many Diné live together, where our prayers and songs still have power." He instructed me to undergo a purification ceremony to cleanse myself of the encounter. He explained that such entities can leave a spiritual residue, an invisible mark that others of their kind can sense, like sharks detecting blood in water. For weeks afterward, I took a different route home from work, adding almost an hour to my commute. I never drove after sunset. When I eventually had to take that same road again, I did so only in daylight, with sacred items my grandfather had given me placed on the dashboard of my truck. It's been over 25 years since that night. I still work construction, though now I'm a foreman with my own crew. I've never told this story publicly before today. Speaking of skinwalkers is taboo in Navajo culture. Some believe that merely discussing them invites their attention. So why am I breaking that silence now? Because the incidents are increasing. In the past decade, there have been more sightings, more encounters, more unexplained phenomena on that same stretch of highway. Most go unreported in official channels. Who would believe them? But they spread through our community. Whispered warnings passed from family to family. Something is changing. The boundaries between worlds seem to be thinning, and the entities that dwell in those in-between spaces are growing bolder. I still drive that same route to work sometimes, but never at night. And if I'm running late, I get a motel room in Flagstaff and call my wife to let her know I won't be home. Sometimes, especially on moonless nights, I still feel like something is watching me through my bedroom window, waiting, patient, knowing that eventually I'll have to drive that lonely road at night again. My grandfather was right. Once they've seen you, they don't forget, and neither will you. Have you ever experienced something on a deserted road that defied explanation? Something that made you question what you thought you knew about reality? Share your encounter in the comments below. And if this documented account made you reconsider driving alone at night, subscribe for more true experiences that mainstream sources won't acknowledge. Turn on notifications so you never miss another warning that might one day save your life.
There are legends that are born of lies, but there are those that are born of truth. The difference is that when they are real, you never sleep easy again.